The Holy Shroud, for centuries, researchers from all over the world have been studying what is considered one of the most important, yet at the same time most mysterious, relics in all of Christianity. But what is so mysterious about this simple piece of linen that it has engaged researchers in years of in-depth studies? The carbon-14 analyses had dated the shroud to the medieval period, and as a result, debunked the idea that it could be the burial cloth of Jesus. If you have the patience to follow this video, you'll realize that the issue is much more complex and fascinating than what you've been told. Clearly, those who have faith have no doubts about its origin. But approaching the issue from a secular, historical, and scientific perspective, it's inevitable to notice that there are many enigmatic elements that still await explanation. Before we begin this journey where you'll hear theories and hypotheses that will guide you beyond the limits of knowledge, as always, we invite you to subscribe to the channel to support our work and to not miss our upcoming videos.
Joseph, having taken the body of Jesus, wrapped it in a white shroud and laid it in his own new tomb that he had carved out of the rock. Then he rolled a large stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away.
Except for what we find written in the Gospels, which have been meticulously handed down over the years, we have no detailed accounts describing the death of Jesus and consequently the burial shroud in which he was wrapped. For almost 1,000 years, in fact, we have no record of the shroud. It is only around the year 1000 that the fascinating story of the shroud begins, which according to Christian tradition is believed to have been wrapped around the body of Jesus Christ. In 944, the chronicles report that the mandilion, also known as the image of Edessa, was a cloth on which the image of Jesus was said to be imprinted. The image of Christ was transferred to Constantinople during the reign of Emperor Romanos I Lycapenos. This event was celebrated with great solemnity, and Archdeacon Gregorios Referendarios, on the occasion, gave a sermon in which he described the image of Edessa as an image not made by human hands. Before this event, we know very little about the shroud. A legend says that the king of Edessa, a place now located in what is Turkey, was suffering from a serious illness and sent a messenger to Jesus asking to be healed. Jesus, unable to go in person, sent a cloth with his image, which miraculously healed Abgar. Not all historians agree that the image of Edessa and the shroud could be the same relic. But what we do know is that in 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, Constantinople was sacked, and the image of Edessa disappeared without a trace. According to some accounts, the shroud was brought to Europe, and in 1353, it was displayed in the Church of Lirey, in France, by the Templar knight Geoffrey de Charny. This is currently recognized as the first official evidence of the existence of the shroud. In 1502, the shroud was transferred to Chambéry, still in France, and here in 1532, it was reportedly damaged by a fire and later repaired by the nuns. In 1578, Emmanuel Philibert of Savoy transferred the shroud to Italy, specifically to Turin, to facilitate a pilgrimage by Archbishop St. Charles Borromeo, who wished to see the relic to thank God for the end of the plague in Milan. Since then, the shroud has remained in Turin, where it is kept in a beautiful Baroque chapel located in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. The first documented analysis of the Shroud of Turin dates back to 1898. When the photographer Secondo Pia took the first photographs of it, at first glance the fabric in the photo appeared slightly faded, and an image vaguely resembling that of a man emerged from it. But when the negatives of the photographs were observed, a much more defined and outlined image emerged. The image that all of us know today. The image obtained from the negatives was in fact so astonishing at the time that for a long time it was thought that the negatives had been retouched. They were declared authentic only after nearly 50 years of study. A noteworthy investigation was carried out by the Swiss criminologist Max Frey, who in 1978, after 5 years of studies, managed to identify some pollen present on the cloth and traced it back to the Middle East. But the first real and most in-depth study also took place in 1978, carried out by an international research group led by the United States, to whom the Vatican allowed to analyze the shroud and take samples from it. Until that moment, many thought that the shroud was nothing more than a painting made in the medieval period, but the analyses carried out by the research group would completely overturn this idea.
Our investigation revealed that the shroud is not a painting. The evidence clearly shows that the image was not created with pigments. The idea that someone joined the project trying to prove it wasn't a painting is bizarre, since we were all trying to find out what kind of painting it was.
The tests had therefore concluded that there were no artificial pigments on the cloth, and that the image had not been painted, printed, or applied with heat, and therefore it could not be the work of an artist. In addition to this, the scientists examined the blood stains on the cloth and confirmed that they were composed of hemoglobin and tested positive for serum albumin, both proteins found in human blood. Later on, they would even be able to determine the blood type, which was identified as AB, a fairly rare blood type that only 4% of the world's population has.
The interesting thing is that with all the work done, we still can't suggest a simple process by which the image and the blood were placed on the cloth. We feel quite strongly that the blood was deposited by contact with a wounded body, but it's clear that the image was formed by a different process.
The most interesting aspect that came out thanks to this study is that the image is not a painting, and that the blood stains present are actually blood. But above all, the image imprinted on the shroud could not have been imprinted on the cloth by the pressure exerted by the body. In fact, the image would have been formed in another mysterious and unknown way. And this is precisely one of the most enigmatic questions. How was the image imprinted on it formed? One of the most fascinating theories, which tries to explain the phenomenon, is that of Giulio Fanti, a mechanical engineer and professor at the University of Padua. Fanti has actually hypothesized that the image may have been formed through a brief but intense flow of energy, like a burst of radiation, which would have caused a chemical reaction in the linen fabric. The radiated energy would have caused a slight oxidation of the surface fibers of the linen, producing a negative image. This oxidation process is similar to what happens when linen ages naturally, but in this case it was accelerated and localized by the burst of radiation. This would explain why the image is superficial and does not penetrate the fabric, and why the fibers are only slightly colored. If Fanti's theory explains how the image could have been transferred onto the shroud, there remains an important question to answer. What could have triggered such an emission of energy? And one answer was this.
Sono stati in grado di spiegare esattamente come il corpo e il tessuto possano essere stati esposti ad un'energia così intensa. Ma anche se l'evento descritto sembra unico, non è impossibile che esistano fenomeni naturali rari e poco compresi che possano generare radiazioni ad alta energia. Prima però di provare a dare una possibile spiegazione a questo impossibile fenomeno, dobbiamo analizzare un altro interessante studio effettuato sulla sindone.
In 1988, the Vatican entrusted 3 independent laboratories, the University of Oxford, the University of Arizona, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, to carry out radiocarbon dating tests on small samples of the shroud to determine its origin and age. All 3 laboratories determined with a 95% reliability that the fabric of the shroud can be dated between 1260 and 1390, which is more than 1,000 years after the death of Jesus Christ. According to the researchers, this would coincide with the first historical appearance of the shroud, which, as we know, took place in 1353 through the efforts of Goffredo di Charny. So this should be the definitive proof that the shroud could not have been the burial cloth that wrapped the body of Jesus Christ. But when it comes to the shroud, things are never that simple or obvious. Many researchers who have been studying the burial cloth for years have questioned the results of the study, due to a mistake made by the men of the Vatican. When the samples were taken to be distributed to the 3 research centers, some small pieces of fabric were taken from the corners of the shroud, corners that were most likely the result of restoration work carried out over the years. To obtain an accurate dating, the samples should have been taken from the center of the burial cloth. We know historically that the shroud has undergone several restorations, some of them very significant, such as the one that took place after the fire of 1500. In addition to this, there is the work of Raymond Rogers, an important American chemist who states that the edges of the shroud contain 37% vanillin, while the main body of the shroud contains 0%. Vanillin is a degradation product of lignin, a substance found in plants. In linen, vanillin degrades over time, so its presence or absence can provide clues about the age of the fabric. The fact that Rogers did not find vanillin in the shroud, except on its edges, would confirm both the restoration work carried out in the medieval period and the antiquity of the shroud. In fact, vanillin degrades over time until it disappears. Analyses of ancient linens, such as those in which the Dead Sea Scrolls are written, or other very old linens, confirm its absence. According to Rogers, then, the shroud would be between 1,800 and 3,000 years old. If, as we have seen, there are multiple doubts about the dating of the shroud, there remains a question we promised to answer. How did the image of a man get imprinted on the linen of the burial cloth? Several researchers have analyzed sediments taken from the Dead Sea area and have identified signs of significant seismic activity.
Potrebbe essere collocata fra il 26 e il 36 d.C.
The time interval coincides with the governorship of Pontius Pilate in Judea and with the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. This event is also mentioned in the Gospels, particularly in the Gospel of Matthew, which describes a terrible earthquake at the moment of Jesus' death.
And immediately the veil of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, the tombs were opened, and many bodies of dead saints were raised. The centurion and those who were with him guarding Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and what was happening, were filled with great fear and said, "Truly this man was the Son of God."
Another still mysterious aspect, but for which there is considerable documentation, is the existence of energy-related phenomena during earthquakes, including recorded instances of ball lightning, also known as luminous spheres, or globes of light. During earthquakes, in fact, it is possible that piezoelectric stresses in the rocks generate electric charges that accumulate and are suddenly released, which can potentially give rise to ball lightning. As we have seen previously, Professor Giulio Fanti hypothesizes that the image on the shroud may have been formed through a brief but intense flow of energy. So, hypothetically, if ball lightning released during an earthquake-related discharge had struck the body of a man wrapped in a linen cloth, this could have provided the necessary energy to cause the physico-chemical reaction on the surface of the fabric fibers and imprint the image. Clearly, it's a borderline hypothesis, but it suggests that the earthquake could have been connected to this event. There's also Alberto Carpentieri's team, a professor at the Polytechnic University of Turin, who proposed a theory according to which the image on the shroud could have been caused by neutrons emitted during a major earthquake that occurred in Jerusalem. Carpentieri also conducted experiments in the laboratory which confirmed that it is possible to generate neutrons from rocks placed under high pressure, and therefore the neutrons could have interacted with the nitrogen nuclei present in the linen fibers of the shroud, and could have created the image of the crucified body. Obviously, all this raises further questions, and inevitably draws attention to the synchronicity of these extraordinary events, and to the likelihood that all this could have happened. What we can certainly say is that the shroud still represents a huge mystery, and that the truth about this ancient relic is definitely much more complex than many popularizers have portrayed it over the years. At this point, we ask for your opinion. Is the image created on the shroud the result of an event that we still can't fully understand? Or is it the product of a clever fabrication? Let us know in the comments what you think, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support our work and to not miss our upcoming videos. Until the next story.